A very tense weekend as Israel is once again under missile attacks from Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. This morning, a missile launched from Yemen sent millions of Israelis throughout central Israel, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, into bomb shelters just as children were getting ready to go to school. The IDF was able to intercept the missile before it crossed into Israeli territory. This is the reality Israelis are now facing as the ceasefire with Hamas broke down last week, and the IDF is intensifying its operations against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The so-called axis of resistance is still alive and kicking, though clearly severely weakened. And so ILTV's Ariella Lichiani has the details on Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels as they continue their unprovoked attacks on Israel.
Sirens sounded throughout central Israel, including Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, early Sunday morning as the Israeli military successfully intercepted a projectile launch from Yemen before it crossed into Israeli territory. The attack, which took place at around 7:25 a.m., forced temporary closures at Ben Gurion Airport. A Fly Dubai flight had to reroute, and operations were briefly halted while the runways were scanned. Fortunately, no debris or casualties have been reported, thanks to the swift response of Israel's defense systems. This is the fourth missile launched at Israel from Yemen this past week. Over the weekend, the Houthis claimed responsibility for a missile fired at Ben Gurion International Airport and threatened more attacks.
استهدفت القوة الصاروخية مطار بن غوريون في منطقة يافا المحتلة، وذلك بصاروخ باليستي فرط صوتي نوع فلسطين 2. وقد حققت العملية هدفها بنجاح بفضل الله، وتعد هذه العملية هي الثالثة خلال 48 ساعة، وتنبه القوات المسلحة اليمنية كافة شركات الطيران إلى أن ما يسمى بمطار بن غوريون أصبح غير آمن لحركة الملاحة الجوية، وسيستمر كذلك حتى وقف العدوان على غزة ورفع الحصار عنها.
The Houthis also claim to have launched drone attacks targeting U.S. warships associated with the aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman in the Red Sea. These acts of aggression are part of a broader response to U.S. military operations in Yemen. Meanwhile, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei stated that groups like the Houthis act on their own motivations despite their alignment with Iran. However, U.S. President Donald Trump has made it clear that the U.S. will hold Iran accountable for any attacks carried out by the Houthis. Israel's military continues to remain on high alert as the Houthis threaten to intensify their attacks against Israel. The situation remains volatile, but Israel remains resilient and prepared to defend itself against all threats.
And joining us now, we have ILTV correspondent Shosh Bedrosian standing by on the northern border to give us a report on the mood following Hezbollah's recent rocket fire. Shosh, what can you tell us?
Lidar, we are located just a few kilometers outside of the Druze city, Majd el-Shams, which is very close to the border of Lebanon and Syria, and just a few kilometers away, about a 30-40 minute drive away through the mountains of Metula, which is the location where rockets were received from Lebanon territory, were fired into Metula on Saturday morning. Of course, this puts everybody on edge. So many people in the north of the Galilee are starting to move back to this area, rebuild their communities after ongoing rocket attacks that happened between Hezbollah coming into Israeli territory. We know that the IDF has struck multiple infrastructure targets and Hezbollah command centers since all of this unfolded with these rocket attacks in Metula. And like I said, of course, it causes a lot of concern for people who do live in the north of Israel here. Lidar?
And now let's take a look at the details of the dramatic events that took place over the weekend.
Israel's north was targeted on Saturday by Hezbollah missile fire from southern Lebanon. 6 rockets were detected crossing from South Lebanon into the Israeli northern town of Metula. 3 of the rockets were downed by missile air defense before entering Israeli territory, while 3 launches did cross into Israeli airspace and fell in open areas. According to a statement by the IDF, the rocket fire constitutes a blatant violation of the understandings between Israel and Lebanon. Israel holds the state of Lebanon responsible for upholding the agreement. Following the incoming rockets, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz ordered a wave of airstrikes on Hezbollah sites across Lebanon. Defense Minister Katz, in a direct threat to the Lebanese government, said that the fate of Metula is the same as Beirut. He added that Israel will not allow a reality of fire from Lebanon and the Galilee communities. A few hours after this statement, the Lebanese army announced it had acted to destroy 3 makeshift rocket launchers it discovered in Lebanese territory. Meanwhile, the IDF struck multiple Hezbollah rocket launchers and a command center from which Hezbollah terrorists were operating in southern Lebanon. The IDF said it will continue to act as required in order to protect Israeli citizens. Following the rocket fire, Hezbollah issued a statement denying its involvement and said it was not responsible for the rocket attacks. In the statement, the Iranian terror proxy said it reiterates its commitment to the ceasefire agreement. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir held a situation assessment following the attacks, and home front command directives were unchanged. Yet the residents of the north, many of whom had just returned home after over a year of being evacuated from northern towns, expressed deep concern over the missile attacks. Metula's mayor called on the Israeli government not to allow reality in which rocket fire from Lebanon is normalized and called to immediately take strong offensive action against Hezbollah to ensure lasting calm in the north.
And joining us now with more on the latest developments on the multi-front war is Dan Pfefferman, Middle East Affairs expert and chairman of Sharaka. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So this was a very difficult weekend for Israelis, with scenes reminiscent of the early days after October 7th, Israel under attack from the south, from the north, from Yemen, perhaps not with the same intensity, but are we back to a multi-front war?
I don't know if we're back to a multi-front war, but I think we never quite left it. The various terrorist groups have been severely weakened, some more than others. But of course, it was a jarring weekend for everyone in Israel. And I think, to be honest, we're all still quite traumatized. We're all still living in a state of PTSD that hasn't really transpired since October 7th. Maybe we had a few months of quiet respite, but we're still there. And, I don't think we're going to go back to the days of intense rocket fire. Hamas is clearly on its last legs. I'm not sure at all. I haven't seen any indications that the rocket fire from Lebanon was Hezbollah. And the Houthis are, of course, a different story. But it's jarring. We're still in it. We're not out of the thick of this 500-plus day war. But I think we are on the second half of it, as opposed to still in the midst of it.
Mm-hmm. And, let's start with the Houthis. At first, they were seen as nothing more than a nuisance, but just today, they forced millions into bomb shelters. And despite the U.S. attacks, they are still standing their ground. I mean, what more needs to be done to eliminate this threat?
Yeah, first of all, I think they're still a nuisance. And that's really what they are. They are a radical, absolutely radical, fanatical a terrorist pirate militia group based in Yemen who is trying to force themselves into relevancy, into the conversation of the Middle East. And what is required, I'm not sure anyone has really thought about them seriously. The Saudis and the UAE did try to wage a contracted war against them that also failed to take them out. I think we're going to need to see ongoing strikes by the United States, by the international community, and of course Israel may or may not need to be involved in this to take out as much of their capabilities as possible. But that doesn't mean they're not going to try to insert themselves violently into the conversation as much as possible. And really that's what they're trying to do, is trying to just achieve some kind of relevance in the greater battles taking place across the Middle East.
And, moving now to Israel's northern front with Lebanon, the missile attacks, clearly a violation of the ceasefire agreement. What's going on with the ceasefire agreement? Is it going to hold? I know that in Lebanon, they're trying to distance themselves from this missile attack. But, what can you tell us on this front?
Yeah, again, the indications I've seen from press reports and on open source reports is that it's not Hezbollah. There are a number of different kinds of armed groups, terrorist groups, militia groups, including Palestinian groups in southern Lebanon. We're at a very critical juncture in which the IDF operations, following, of course, the famous pager attack, weakened Hezbollah. It took out its top leadership, of course, took out the vast majority of its terror and military infrastructure, to the point where the Lebanese state and the Lebanese army, generally considered weak, could reassert itself for the first time in decades. We need to play a careful game here. I think we do need to show, certainly Hezbollah, but also the Lebanese, that we are serious, that we will not let fire go unanswered, rocket fire go unanswered. At the same time, we need to encourage and work with maybe other regional actors to allow and ensure the Lebanese state to reclaim sovereignty over all of Lebanon. So our counter strikes, as justified as they are, need to be very careful.
And meanwhile, the fighting in Gaza is continuing. Is there an end in sight to this? What will it take now from Israel in order to be able to declare victory, to achieve victory?
What we've learned from the last 530 plus days of fighting against this absolutely fanatical enemy in Gaza, you have to figure out what hurts them. Clearly, the destruction of property in Gaza doesn't hurt them. Clearly, the loss of lives, both of their own terrorists and of civilians in Gaza, does not faze them. And so now the Israeli leadership, we saw Defense Minister Katz threatening to conquer and hold territory in Gaza. Maybe that will work. What seems to be the case, though, is you need to bring back a lot of pressure on Hamas in order to force them to come back to the table. You need to, first of all, release the hostages. That's the last real weak point that we have. And part of what we're doing now is trying to up the pressure. They've used the last few months of the ceasefire to regroup, to rearm, to recruit new fighters. And part of what we saw, the renewed rocket fire is a result of them having this breathing space. So this is taking out now the breathing space, reconquering areas that we had left, taking out terrorist infrastructure, which is important, upping the pressure on them. We need to get back our hostages and then pressure Hamas in every imaginable way possible and get them to accept a disarmament deal. That's really the only way out of this. As long as they're in power, we're going to have continued fighting over and over, whether it's every month or every year. But they need to be taken out of power. They need to be dismantled, demilitarized, and the entire region needs to be part of this effort.
Absolutely. Dan Pfefferman, thank you so much for your analysis today. Certainly never a dull moment here in Israel. And in Gaza, the IDF said they eliminated Hamas political leader Salah al-Bardawil in an airstrike in southern Gaza's Khan Yunis. These developments followed the renewed ground offensive and recent Defense Minister Katz's threats to annex parts of the Strip. More on this from ILTV's Devo Klein.
Israeli airstrikes shook Khan Yunis as the IDF confirmed the elimination of Hamas political leader Salah al-Bardawil. Also killed in the airstrike is al-Bardawil's wife in the latest developments of the renewed offensive in Gaza. Bardawil's elimination marks the fourth member of Hamas's political wing killed since the renewal of fighting last week. The IDF has renewed its activity in northern Gaza's Beit Hanun in an operation meant to target Hamas's terror infrastructure sites and expand the security zone in Gaza. The 525th Brigade is leading the ground operation in northern Gaza as the Gaza-Israel ceasefire came to an end last week on Tuesday, and Hamas fails to deliver remaining hostages. In southern Gaza, IDF vehicles were seen advancing into the Rafah area after evacuation notices were dropped by the IDF over the Tel Sultan neighborhood. On Saturday night, the Security Cabinet met and approved a new directorate to enable voluntary departure of Palestinians from Gaza. Defense Minister Katz's office confirmed in a statement that the new directorate will work to enable safe and controlled passage of Gazans to countries by establishing moving routes, conducting pedestrian checks at various checkpoints, and coordinating the provision of infrastructure to accomplish these goals. Katz's office confirmed that the head of the directorate will be selected by Katz soon. This comes after Defense Minister Israel Katz's announcement on Friday, in which he stated that Israel would annex areas of the Gaza Strip should the terror group Hamas refuse to release the remaining hostages it's still holding.
אם לא ישוחררו כל החטופים הישראלים והחמאס לא יסולק מעזה, ישראל תפעל בעוצמות שעוד לא הכרתם. קבלו את עצת נשיא ארצות הברית, תחזירו את החטופים ותסלקו את החמאס, ויפתחו לכם אופציות אחרות, כולל יציאה למקומות אחרים בעולם למי שירצה. האלטרנטיבה היא הרס וחורבן מוחלט.
And now an exciting opportunity for our viewers. Join ILTV and Afeka College of Engineering in Tel Aviv for Breaking the Code, an exclusive deep dive into the education, skills, and industry connections shaping the next generation of innovators. This isn't just a virtual conference, it's a chance to hear from some of the most influential leaders in Israel's high-tech ecosystem, including Uri Levine, founder of Waze, and Eugene Kandel, chairman of the board of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. So don't miss out. Register now for this special one-hour event by scanning the QR code on your screen. And in other news, tensions rising in Israel, not only due to the war, but from within. Large-scale protests resuming against the government's decision to fire Israeli security chief Ronen Bar and the vote to dismiss Attorney General Galia Barhav Miara. And the Prime Minister Netanyahu finally speaking out on the issue with a dramatic revelation. The details in the following report.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Saturday night that he intends to move forward with his decision to fire Israeli security chief Ronen Bar, despite the temporary freeze imposed by the Supreme Court.
אני רוצה להבהיר, רונן בר לא יישאר ראש השב"כ, לא תהיה מלחמת אחים, וישראל תישאר מדינה דמוקרטית.
Netanyahu added that Israel is a country of law, and the law simply states that the government has the authority to terminate the position, which is a position of trust. In the video statement released Saturday night, as protests were held in Tel Aviv and other sites around the country, Netanyahu directly addressed the accusation that he was firing Bar in order to halt the investigation of what has been dubbed Qatargate, or the issue of foreign funding from Qatar. He presented what he called, quote, a dramatic revelation of facts.
אי האמון שלי בראש השב"כ החל ב7 באוקטובר, כשהוא לא העיר אותי, וגם לא העיר אחרים, והוא הלך והתגבר עד כדי הדחתו של רונן מצוות המשא ומתן, וכל זה קרה הרבה לפני ההחלטה על פתיחת החקירה בעניין קטאר.
The Prime Minister said he wanted to fire Bar after he submitted his report on the failings of his agency on October 7th, as was the case with the IDF Chief of Staff. Netanyahu then reveals a letter from Bar requesting to delay the submission of the Shin Bet's investigation findings by nearly 2 weeks. Netanyahu said Bar missed the new deadline and sought yet another extension on February 27th. He said that the very same evening, Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara announced the launch of the Qatargate probe. The Prime Minister suggested the timing was not a coincidence and clearly implied that Bar coordinated with the Attorney General to put a stop to his dismissal. This bombshell allegation has been denied by the Attorney General's office, who said the investigation began before the firing process. Despite Netanyahu's revelation, the opposition parties have called for mass protests seeking to halt the dismissals in scenes that are very reminiscent to the protests prior to October 7th over the legal reforms.
In an inspiring display of solidarity, Steve Katz, a South Florida emergency room physician, is leading Jewish National Fund USA's Brotherhood mission to Israel, bringing support to communities devastated by the October 7th Hamas attacks. The mission has assembled nearly 50 participants, predominantly from South Florida, who raised an impressive $1 million through grassroots community efforts. These funds are now being directed towards rebuilding the Israel envelope region, extending compassionate aid to Israeli citizens, and addressing urgent and future needs across affected communities. Joining us now for an interview, Steve Katz. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So, most of us don't wake up and think, maybe I'll raise $1 million or $2 million for Israel today. What motivated you to stand up for Israel in such a philanthropic way?
After October 7th, it became even clearer to me that this was not the time to stand on the sidelines as a Jew, and that we as Jews are all committed to the state of Israel and to our brothers and sisters in Israel. And we must all either join the army or help our people in some meaningful way. We always joke with our Brotherhood mission that we're the support staff, providing fuel to the people on the ground that are doing the heavy lifting.
So can you share with us more about this group that you've brought to Israel?
So last year we brought 38 men from around the United States, mostly South Florida, Israel. We raised $1.1 million last year. This year we had 45 men. We raised almost $2.4 million, all for projects in Israel. Most of these were people that either I knew personally or people that knew people that I knew personally. And it's really just been an amazing brotherhood of kindred spirits, all committed to the people of the state of Israel.
And so, during your delegation's visit, can you maybe share with our viewers a moment that really, touched you, especially now after October 7th?
One of the common conversations we had, whether it was in the rehab facilities of Tel Aviv or Adi Negev, where we met soldiers that were injured, or whether it was former hostages that we met, was, why are you here? Thank you for being here. And it was a very humbling concept that we were being thanked when we were really not doing the heavy lifting. It was really the people on the ground who live in Israel that were doing the heavy lifting. But the fact that Israel has been so unfairly portrayed in the media and that we've made the victims into the oppressors is the shameful part of this entire story. And it was just very humbling that we were considered someone to be thanked when it was quite the opposite.
And you've raised such an incredible sum of money for Israel, but how does it feel to actually see the work of the Jewish National Fund USA here in person in Israel?
It's extremely motivating to see the projects that we funded last year with empty farms. And this year we went back to those farms, Rimon Farm in particular in the Negev, where we actually see children planting in the fields. And we see soldiers getting PTSD therapy on those same exact fields that were barren just a year before. So for us, it's just an incredibly moving part of our participation in the story of the Jewish people.
And so what are you planning now for next year? And how can people, if our viewers watching, how can they sign up?
Next year, we plan on having 100 people. Our goal is to raise $4 million for projects in Israel. I'm super confident that we're going to do it. It'll all be through JNF USA, and they could reach out to jnf.org to the missions, and they will see a link there for the Brotherhood mission.
All right, well, Steve Katz, thank you so much for joining us today and also for the incredible work that you're doing here for the people of Israel.
Thank you, and Am Yisrael Chai, now and always.
Am Yisrael Chai. And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies are expected around most of the country tonight, with temperatures reaching lows of around 10 degrees Celsius or 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we'll see more clear skies alongside warm temperatures with highs of 22 degrees Celsius or 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels, subscribe to our newsletter, and explore our website, iltv.tv. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Ladar Gravelazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.